I'm going to make you a bet. I bet you've walked into a room and had moments where you noticed something was off, or when you thought about someone and 30 seconds later they texted you, where you had a feeling about a person or a situation that you couldn't explain and it turned out to be true. And I bet every single time that happened, you explained it away. I got lucky. It was a coincidence. I was reading the room. I just know her so well. Here's what I want to tell you. You've been calling your intuition something else your entire life. I want to give you the proof that your intuition has been working, because by the end of this video, I think you're going to look back at your whole life and go, oh, that's what that was. I'm Emily Snyder, psychic medium for pets and people, and I love teaching people all about their intuition. Let's get to it. For most people, when they talk about reading the energy of the room, they talk about tension or being able to tell when something is off, but actually the gift is bigger than that. It really does read in every single direction. A few years ago, my husband and I went to a wedding upstate. It's October, it's outside, the ceremony's in the trees, and the breeze had a real opinion about what the temperature should be. We sat down for the ceremony and the wind just brought something into the space. We both felt it. It was almost magical. The leaves were making the most beautiful noise. There were even a few raindrops coming and going during the ceremony. And at one point, the groom stood up with his guitar and sang. Something was alive in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. We just looked at each other and knew it was going to be one of those nights. It was in the air, and it was. Something just clicked into place in that wedding, and we never really spoke about it, but we both felt it and left the wedding going, that was a great wedding. That was in fact energy reading, not just sensing when something was wrong, but reading the energy of the entire space. You've probably done this your whole life and called it atmosphere or just having a good time or the vibe being just right. What you're actually doing is receiving the energy of the space before your brain has a second to catch up. It's before logic can take over. You're not actually picking things up, you're tuning in, and those are different things. I had a gut feeling. My gut told me to do it. My gut just said yes. Most people treat this as just like a body sensation, something completely separate from their higher self or their spiritual self. Here's my take. Your body isn't processing the information on its own. It's picking up on something and interpreting it for itself. That sick feeling that you've got before you make a wrong decision, or that completely settled feeling when you know you're on the right path. The lurch of something wrong when everything should be right. That's not your stomach. That's your intuition using your stomach as the messenger. The body is translating that energy into something that you'll notice. And most of us are much better at noticing a physical sensation in our stomach than we are a quiet all-knowing. This information will come in wherever your body holds it. So for me, it's definitely the gut, but it could also be your shoulders, your neck, your chest. It's not because that's where the information lives. It's just where you're most likely to pay attention. So when you say, my gut told me, yes, it did. It was your intuition using your gut as something you would notice. Gut instinct is completely fine to say. Just understand that it actually is your intuition. Let me tell you about a few moments in my own practice where coincidence stopped being a practical explanation. A friend came to me asking if she should go on a volunteer trip to Guatemala, and I said to her, it doesn't matter, the choice won't be yours. She called me back a couple weeks later to tell me that the trip had been canceled due to flooding. The decision won't be yours. Now, I didn't know what I meant when I said it. I just had to trust that it would be true. Another friend was going through a hard time financially, and she asked, is there any money coming? And I could see it. I could see a check in the mail very vividly. And so I said to her, there's a check in the mail. She's like, there's no check in the mail. 3 days later, she called me and said that she'd gotten a check for work that her husband had completed and they'd completely forgotten about. And then there's this one that's super personal and very sad. When my cat Violet went into the hospital with something that seemed completely fixable, just constipation, I had this all-knowing sensation come over me that just said, this is the end. And I kept trying to shake it because that didn't make any sense at the time. And yet something said, this is the end. I pushed against that feeling. I truly did. I thought maybe it was just my emotions taking over, which can happen in situations like this. I desperately wanted to be wrong, but the feeling never left. It stayed with me for 3 weeks. And when I finally walked into the vet's office and I was correct, it's kind of the worst form of validation of this ability. I tell you this not to make you sad, even though it's very sad and I very much miss my cat Violet, But this ability, this gift, shows up in not convenient moments as well as the really convenient ones. It sometimes shows up when you don't want to be right. And part of learning is knowing when to just sit with it and know that it's part of the practice. Now I just want you to think about how many times you've been right, but you've explained it away. How many times did coincidence not fully cover that, but it's easier to explain that way? I'm not asking you to call yourself a psychic because sometimes that can feel a bit scary. Call it whatever you like, but at least acknowledge that this is a pattern and a pattern that keeps happening and deserves some form of recognition. At some point, coincidences stop being coincidences, and you've probably already crossed that line. You maybe just haven't let yourself say so. This is the one for people who have had vivid dreams for years, but they just quietly dismiss them away. Who sometimes get images or impressions or words that pop into their mind out of nowhere. Who sometimes know something without being able to explain how. Maybe you didn't think too hard about it because there was no framework. Nobody around you was talking about it. I want you to know those experiences were real. The language part was just missing. What I see in my students when they come to class and say, I'm starting from zero, they are never starting from zero. They have accumulated a life of experiences that we incorporate into our work, and we are already steps ahead of zero. Giving something a name doesn't give you the ability. It just makes it possible for you to intentionally use what you've always had. You're not starting from zero, you're starting from years of unlabeled data. Before your friend says a word, you just knew something was up with your friend. You text first, and then you get them on the phone, and you don't know how, but something is wrong. And when they ask you how you knew, you don't really have a good word for it. You just knew. Let me tell you about an example in my own life. So after a long day of readings, I was taking a walk in the cemetery across the street from my house, and this coworker's face popped in my mind. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I just got her face right in front of me. And when I picked up the phone to call her as I was walking, she said she was going through a bit of an existential crisis. She wanted to move, pack up, and leave this job she'd been in for a long time that was super safe and gave her financial freedom, and go move to spend more time with her mother into a state she'd never lived in before, and it was a bit risky in her mind. What I heard from Spirit in that moment was, your job is to inspire her to go. We talked for about an hour through all the scenarios and everything that had been going on, and she was like, I just really needed this phone call today. And then off she went. I would love to say that I reached out because we're such good friends, but in fact it was that Spirit put her face in front of me and said, you need to call her. Now, you may not frame your version of this story in exactly the same way. You may just get a little feeling come over you that you need to call a specific person. What I will tell you is you're picking up on something much bigger than just empathy. You're doing it ahead of picking up the phone, knowing that someone needs you. It's not just being a good friend, it's being an intuitive one. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Intuition is not a special ability. It's a capacity that we all have that we flex like a muscle. Almost none of us have been taught to work with it intentionally. Reading a space, gut instinct, moments when you've been right against all odds, experiences you have no language for, knowing things about someone you love before they've spoken a word. These aren't 5 separate personality quirks. They're 5 expressions of the same thing, an intelligence operating at a different frequency. Your intuition has been with you your whole life, operating in the background, maybe just without a name. The only difference about where you are now with your intuition versus where you want to be is an awareness of how it works, and then practice. My Intuition for Beginners class starts on August 4th over Zoom. It's designed exactly for the person sitting here going, I've been doing that my whole life. I didn't know what it was called, and now I want to know how to use it. If you want to go even deeper, I have an 8-week Intuition and Psychic Development Circle starting in September. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these 5 you've been experiencing in your life, and maybe what you're calling it. I would love to know. Subscribe for an even deeper dive into practices with your own intuition. I'm Emily Snyder of Connected Intuition. See you next time.